Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Alternate Fighting Styles panel. I'm excited to be here with both of you, and we've got Kevin who will be joining us in a little bit. Would you introduce yourselves to everyone? Jonathan, why don't we start with you?
Okay, I am Jonathan Brazy. I'm a retired Marine colonel, now a full-time writer, living in Colorado Springs, moved here with my wife and twin two-year-old girls. I mostly write military science fiction, but I've been in a variety of subgenres. I've got I think I have 85 titles right now, of which about 59 or 60 are full novels. I'm a two-time Nebula nominee, Dragon nominee, and a USA Today best-selling writer.
That's awesome. And SJ, it's good to see you again.
Good to see you too again, Steve. And my resume is not nearly as impressive as John's. I am S.J. Schauer. I'm the creator, writer of the Spiral War series of military space opera with a hard sci-fi basis. And I'm very much looking forward to this one, especially since I do talk about alternate fighting styles with the various races of my books. Real quick question for John. You're in Colorado Springs?
Yep.
You know Kevin?
Yep. We're all getting together on Tuesday.
Yeah, he's an old buddy of mine. Actually,
Kevin's a good friend.
Yeah, so and I'll actually be out there next February. So
we got to have another author meeting then when you're out here.
Oh yeah, I'll be out at Superstars. So
yep. So will I.
Fantastic. Now,
but I always like to get together away from the.
Kevin's been trying to get me to that thing for years. All right, so Steve, back to you.
I spent some time in Colorado Springs as a kid. I loved it out there. Yeah, I'm excited. I've got a bunch of questions I want to ask you guys. I've worked with James Fox on his Soul project for the book and for the screenplay, looking at fighting styles, and I'm really excited about what your takes are on them. When you are planning your storyline, do you already have a fighting system kind of roughed out for the different aliens versus humans versus casts of different humans? Or do you kind of let the characters tell you how you want to do it? Now, SJ, let's go with you first.
Honestly, I kind of let the characters and the races determine their own fighting style. I think one of the first times I really refer to some alternate fighting styles is one of my characters, she's humanoid, she's hominid, but one of the things that they like to do is they grow extremely long hair, and then they put weapons on the end of their hair. Now, I'm pretty sure I saw that in some Kung Fu movie somewhere.
I was going to say, it sounds like a 1975 Kung Fu movie.
But it was just such an interesting visual for me. I'm like, okay, I want to play with that a little bit. And, so that's one of the things she does. And it then devastates her when, as part of flight training, the first thing they have to do is shave their heads. So she had this hair that extended down past her butt with these weapons on the end, and it really shook her when she had to do that. But then I get other aliens, non-humanoid aliens, that I have one race that's the Otlians. They're four-armed. They have four sets of arms. They have dual arms. So when they go into battle, when they have their form of martial arts, it's an offensive defensive form where one set of arms is attacking and the other set of arms is blocking, defending. So as just a two-armed individual, you're like, how do I get in there? How do I counter that? And even other aliens that are basically giant millipedes. And their particular method of fighting is typically to wrap up their enemy, just jump on them, wrap them, and squeeze them to death, or use their giant pincers to attack. So the biology of your species will really determine a lot of their fighting style, and then the cultural aspect of fighting styles. I know you specialize in European martial arts, and the first time I said that to somebody, they're like, there's no European martial arts. I'm like, yes, there are. Yeah. There were also Native American martial arts. It's just a lot of those have been lost to time because nobody really practices them that much anymore. So,
yeah, whenever somebody says European martial arts, I go, yeah, have you ever heard of a little group called the Romans?
Little group.
Just little one. John, how about you?
I've done both. For my humans, it generally they'll let me know how they're going to be fighting. And oddly enough, one of the things that came up with one of my books that became very popular with my female readers had to do with hair, but that totally came up because the artist screwed up the cover, and I had to recover. But that turned out to be something that so many military women, mostly women who served in the military, contacted me and said they loved it. So that was just serendipity. For my aliens, though, I've had primarily three types of aliens in my major books that were in fighting. Well, more now, I guess. And for them, I kind of knew because of what they are, like yesterday was talking about, because of their physiology, for one, who they're rather large grub-like things who are able to almost have an electric lightning or so, like a electric eel or something. And so those, and the other one became very important, that they were they were really, well, the humans could not really defeat them, but they had this code of, if you would fight them kind of like in a ring, then they were willing to do that. And so, and they also had 4 arms. I guess I'm just following you, SJ, on all of this.
Stephen, who was
I knew in the beginning what the aliens had, how they had to fight, to answer your question.
Okay,
Stephen, who was it in history that would line up on either side of a battlefield, and they would call each other out, and one by one they'd come out and fight each other?
Well, they call that the heroic era. And we saw that in the Nordic periods. We saw that in the Greek periods. And once we hit the Roman period, that was in the large Celtic eras as well. But then once we had the mass battles of the Roman Empire, the heroic era of the Celtic peoples didn't work as well because the Romans weren't going to play that game.
I knew you'd know who that was, who did that.
So let me welcome you to the panel, Jeff. Can we take just a moment and you can introduce yourself to everybody watching this?
Yeah, that'd be great. Sorry for being late. I have a 2-year-old and she required some assistance. My name is Jeffrey H. Haskell. I'm a USA Today bestselling author of 2 superhero series, a couple of military sci-fi one-shots, novellas, an urban fantasy series under a pen name, and I've been doing this full-time for about 4 years now. I was former U.S. Army, and I've done a lot of cool things in my life, and I happen to love writing about fighting and explosions and gunplay and spaceships and the whole bit.
Nice. Well, I'm glad to have you here with us, Jeff. So you guys, both John and SJ, you were talking about 4-armed creatures. I got to tell you, I have a buddy. His name is Kyle Rowling. He's a stuntman and fight choreographer down in Australia, and he was General Grievous in the Star Wars movies. So he had to figure out how to make a 4-armed fight for screen. So, I mean, he tried things like having a smaller guy sit on his back with both of them swinging their lightsabers around, just trying to bring that 4-armed creature to life. As the stories were fantastic. He kept getting clipped in the nose. And
there's actually a book that is the first one I remember with a 4-armed alien in it by Jerry Pernelli and Larry Niven, called The Mountain God's Eye. And if you've never read it, it's an absolutely amazing science fiction novel. Yeah. And most people when they write 4-armed creatures, they have like our arms set up here and then arms like right below them. But in reality, it would be arms right off their hips, because that's another shoulder joint. And so biologically speaking, unless they had another shoulder joint in the middle of their back, the arms would be off their hips. And he had that in that book, in The Mountain God's Eye. And it really was interesting because they had evolved a set of arms for the brute work and then a set of arms for the fine work.
Mhm.
So they'd have like this brute arm that was
Yeah,
like
the
a
gripping
dude's arm
hand.
that would hold it, and then they'd have this like delicate hand to do the fine detailed work while they held it.
And I took that in my book from
Yeah.
Cornell and Niven.
Well, that's because you're
Well, that's one of the
Jonathan.
things. Well, that's one of the things that bugged me about, so many of these four-armed creatures, where it's like when I created my Otlians, for instance, and I first drew them, somebody's like, "Why do they have two sets of pecs?" And I'm like, "Because they have two shoulder joints."
Yeah.
So they have to have two sets of pecs, because if you put arms right here, there's no muscle that pulls the arms forward. And the same thing with pulling them back. And they're like, "Oh, I never thought about that." It's like,
Yeah.
As much as I enjoyed Pocahontas in space, the biology of the features was really, really off.
I work with a lot of people here in my school where they'll have a question like, all right, I'm right-handed, but how come my left arm is bigger than my right arm? Well, that's when you grip everything and do all your fine work with your other arm.
mm-hmm.
So it's gonna be bigger. So there we go into the brute arm idea as well.
Or as like one of my pilot buddies used to say, this is your thinking hand. This is the one that controls the throttle. This is your action hand.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter if you're right or left-handed.
Yep, it's going to be one of them. So, Jeff, I wanted to ask you the same question I asked John and SJ. When you are planning your storyline, do you have a fighting system already in mind for your characters, whether they're humanoid or alien, or do you let the storyline dictate the fighting system for your characters?
Well, that's a great question, Stephen. And I love history. I'm clearly not as well versed in it as you are. I just looking at your background behind you, I can tell you know about 100 times more about history than I do. But I study a lot of history, and most of actually everything I write is inspired by something that actually happened.
I love
Because
that.
I always find the most unbelievable things are the things that truly happened. Historians like to say that Horatius on the bridge didn't happen, that was a myth, because that couldn't have happened. And then I point at the guy who landed a plane on the Potomac. That couldn't have happened either. Those kind of events are the really mind-boggling ones. So I kind of look at history, and history research shows us that people tend to adopt a single technology and apply it to everything. And they tend to adopt a single way and apply it to everything. So right now it's guns, right? Everything is gunpowder. We're just starting to move into electromagnetics and lasers and things like that. But for the last 300 years, it's been, propellant and bullets. And so what I'm developing is,
Battle of Cressy.
huh?
1365, Battle of Cressy is when it started.
Yeah, exactly. So what I'm developing, like my current military sci-fi I'm working on, I developed a technology, and then I tried to change that technology to be everything. And then, it's not just the basis of how they use their guns, it's the basis of their propulsion. Because if you think about like chemical weapons, in a way, it's very similar to internal combustion engines. It's a fire, it's an explosive that drives an engine. And then each empire, so to speak, has their own basis of technology. I've got one that uses a lot of more fragile but more powerful energy weapons, and one that uses exclusively coil guns and coil gun technology, and then of course weapons dictate doctrine, not the other way around. Because if you look at like the Revolutionary War, those poor bastards standing in a line, getting shot at, because that's how you marched into battle when you had swords and shields, and so you have to change the tactics to match the weapons, and it takes a long time. And so I try to map everything out or based around the technology they have available to them, and that builds their fighting style so it feels more organic and more realistic.
And I think certain sci-fi uses that really well and others don't. I think a good example of one that does, and I know I've referenced this already this weekend, is Mass Effect. It's all based around a single technology, and they're using rail guns and coil guns and that kind of thing because the technology makes that the most efficient weapon system. But it also allows for the melee weapons that are basically I'd really have to read the stuff on how
It's,
how the Omni blades work. But
yeah, it's all Mass Effect technology. It's all based on that Mass Effect technology they discovered on Mars. Yeah, that's a great one that uses that. Even their magic powers is all based around.
Is all based on manipulating
Zero,
those Mass Effect fields,
which is the Mass Effect energy. Yeah.
Yeah. How often have we heard the phrase that magic is just misunderstood science?
Mm-hmm.
Arthur C. Clarke.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, and you know, when we talk about alternate fighting styles and we talk about how technologies affect fighting styles, that's a really good thing to look into, because it's the same thing of, I don't want to say a kid in King Arthur's court, or Final Countdown is a really great example. You know, you take the USS Nimitz in 1985 and dump it right before Pearl Harbor. The technology of the day and the way that we fight compared to how we fought even in World War II had advanced so much. It's like, it's shooting fish in a barrel, you know, even though they would vastly outnumber.
Sometimes with advanced technology, you can go backwards in time and use a more primitive technology. I think it was Gordon Dixon on one of his books where they had force fields basically going over the camp. And that basically no energy weapon could get through it, no high-speed kinetic energy go through it. So what they did is they just had basically little darts that they put on top, and because air could get through this field, the dart just slowly worked its way through and then fell and hit the people on the head.
Yeah,
I read that when I was probably about 12, and I thought that was about the cleverest thing that I had ever heard.
Yeah,
that's pretty cool. Sometimes those sci-fi books from the golden age of sci-fi have some crazy ideas that we wouldn't think of today, because we grew up in an era where a lot of that technology actually exists, and we kind of exclude that other ideas from our imagination. But Dune's shields, the shield belts, that was another great one. Only the slow blade penetrates the shield.
Mm-hmm.
So, that kind of meant that, okay, well, people couldn't have guns, and all of a sudden you've got this advanced society fighting with swords.
And that really helps if you make the weapons, a lot of people complain that, well, wait a minute, you wouldn't be using those kind of weapons. Weapons are, 1,000 years from now, the weapons would be so powerful and everything else. Well, that takes away the dramatic tension in the book.
Yeah.
You have to have a way for people to, some are going to die, some are going to live. Some are going to win, some are going to lose.
And also, technology sometimes goes backwards, because if you think about like how advanced Rome was and before the Dark Ages, we still don't know how they make Greek fire, if I recall correctly.
Right.
And there are other amazing advances that the Romans did that we, today, 2,000 years later, still aren't entirely sure how they did. I know with my military sci-fi book, I've got it set 1,000 years in the future, because I didn't want to have to go into the details of the last 100 years or something. You know what I mean? I didn't want to set it in 2300 and then have to explain to people what happened between now and then. So I set 1,000 years in the future, and some of the technology is way more advanced, and some of the technology is not. And they reference a couple of times a war that almost wiped out humanity in the galaxy, that really set things back, and some stuff was lost. So it gives you some freedom to go further ahead in the future. And I always felt like, as long as you ground as much of your technology for the fight in reality, that people will forgive you for the things that aren't, because virtually everything is something that you could imagine happening and working.
One of my favorite stories is a Marine. I think it was Fallujah. He was in a house-to-house fight with his guys. Ran out of ammunition. He had a spork from his MRE in his vest, and he stabbed a guy to death with his spork.
Well, it's the improvised fighting too.
It has to be Marine.
Well, Fallujah would have been Marine, but I'm surprised I haven't. I've been in Fallujah. Though a lot of people have fought there. I never heard that.
It could just be a myth and a story that came out. It's just the idea that
there was a Marine who killed a guy with a brick.
Yeah.
Well, hey, anything's possible. Chester Pulley, right? Am I saying that right?
Chesty Puller.
Chesty Puller dove down into a river under machine gun fire to pull out a 30 cal, if I recall correctly, out of the river to hold off the enemy being fired at the entire time. And if you told that to someone today, hey, I want you to go jump in that river while the AK-47s are shooting at you, they'd be like, well, you're never going to make it. And that guy made it. And of course, he was a Marine. Credit where credit's due. Sometimes the crazy stuff works. Sometimes it doesn't, but you only ever hear about the stuff that works.
There's a guy. In fact, I had a history. I like putting history lessons in my books, and I had a history lesson of a Marine who I think it was Tarawa or it might have been Iwo, where they had taken a 30 cal off of a crashed Wildcat and basically rigged a little harness, but you couldn't carry that much ammo. So he wipes out a couple pillboxes, and for whatever reason, he takes off his boots, runs back to the beach to get more ammo, runs back, does it again, and every time he runs back, he carried a wounded Marine back to the beach. And he did this like 8 times, wiped out all the pillboxes so the people could move, all the bunkers, and he ended up getting the Medal of Honor, although unfortunately he died 3 days later. It was on Iwo. And they called that the Stinger. The using the 30 cal as a man-packed weapon.
That's insane. That's amazing.
I put that in my. I don't know why he took off his boots, but that's just such a classic.
Easier to run in the sand?
I guess so. Yeah, the volcanic sand on Iwo. Maybe that's what it was. But I put that as a history lesson in one of my series. The guy he's trying to teach his Marines that you have to think outside the box. I like doing that.
Yeah, I'm not saying I borrowed that in my first book, but one of my characters did something similar. His fighter's disabled, and he's tired of sitting there in the middle of this combat zone, getting shots pinging off of what's left of his craft. So he gets out and dismounts the plasma laser, and it's just like, okay, let's do this, Just starts taking pot shots at things.
I could go on for hours with this, but we should probably go on to the next question here. And,
you got the right crowd, Steven.
Yeah, right, because I love this stuff, as you know. How have you created fighting system for your alien species that are not humanoid? SJ, let's start with you because you already talked about your millipede guys.
Right. Like I said, a lot of it depends on the physiology of the aliens. Would a avian alien really want to fight on the ground? It's like a snake fighting a hawk. The hawk's going to grab the snake, pull it into the air where it has the advantage. So if you've got an alien that has wings and has the lifting ability to pick something up off the ground, pick their enemy up off the ground, that's what they're going to do. They're going to grab, pull them up, and while they're disoriented, disarm them and either pummel them or drop them.
Crows, just like crows.
Yeah, get them up 200 feet and drop them. And it's like, yeah, he's dead. And then move on to the next one. The millipedes that wrap them up and then start pummeling them. What I find more interesting, yeah, or the alien. What I find more interesting is trying to come up with a combat system for an alien without hands. And to borrow from Mass Effect again, sorry, the Elcor. I wish we could have seen this happen. Where the whole thing they describe how they fight is they're basically elephant-like aliens. They don't have hands. What they have instead is they have AI-driven turrets that people strap to their backs, and then they run into combat, and it's shooting at the enemies, and they're like, yes, with embarrassment, we are called walking tanks. And all I could think of while playing that section is, I want to ride an Elcor into combat. So it's like, yeah, their support role. But, how do you take a four-legged species with no arms that maybe uses its mouth or some other appendage for manipulating things? How do they do battle? And, it's trampling, it's sitting on, it's running things over, it's strapping weapons to their backs, So I find that really fascinating to do, because it really puts you outside your box, and it takes you away from the typical punching and kicking and chopping and eye gouging and, you know, the stuff we're used to seeing.
I like Ant-like Aliens Armor by John Stakely. I loved how he did those aliens in that book. In my 5-year-old. In my Full Metal Superhero series, I don't have any. I do have aliens, but they're so advanced that you never really fight them. She never really fights them hand to hand, except for a couple of situations. But the one I liked writing the most was her biggest enemy was an AI named Legion, and he called himself Legion because of the biblical reference, because he had nanite technology that allowed him to create artificial, androids basically out of nanites. And the way he would have them fight was, it looked like humans because he used them to infiltrate, but the way he'd have them fight wasn't any way that a human would ever fight, because you would never risk your life like that. You wouldn't throw 3 people at somebody they couldn't defeat in order to distract them to get the other guy by. And so it was really kind of interesting. I had to sort of take my humanity out of the picture and write this AI, what is the most efficient use of this army, even if it means the army is destroyed. Because What does he care? They're artificial. And, there's a lot of cool, especially when they didn't know that it was nanite androids. They were shocked, what the heck is going on here? Why are these people killing themselves? So you can really get creative and sort of try to divorce your humanity from what you're doing. It's impossible. You can't, but as much as you can objectively, and you can really come up with some really neat ideas about how things would fight.
Cool. And John, what about you?
With my 4-armed aliens, they were actually, other than the fact they had 4 arms and how they used it, they actually fought more like humans, because I needed this this one-on-one combat aspect, where they send one and you send one, and if you win, you get the planet or whatever it is. However, for my other aliens, I had to really think about how I was going to shift it around. For my big grubs who had the energy weapons, the biological energy weapons, I had to think, if you were a giant grub and you've got these, how basically how would you do combat? And it isn't hand to hand, because they don't have hands. So I had to really think of that and develop what I thought was a realistic way of fighting. And with my latest book, or latest series that I'm doing with Jeff Cheney, the aliens in the first 3 books, they are an advanced species who are an advanced race that's in decline. Their DNA is crumbling. They're not reproducing. But they have great technology. So for them, they never went out like infantry. They never went out. Humans didn't even see them, because they were always encased in some kind of armor, some kind of vehicle, and they had self-destructs on it. So if they were going to die, we could get other molecules. So I figured, if you were in that decline, you're dying out, your race is becoming extinct, that would be a logical way for them to pursue war.
Is that the book series, Colonel, you're doing with Michael Giancarlo? Does one of the...
No, that was with Richard Fox. Giancarlo Esposito did the audiobook. That was human versus human, Army versus Marines. I took the Marine commander. Richard took the Army commander, alternating chapters.
Nice.
Podium Audio liked the idea. And so they got Giancarlo Esposito, who is, I'm not a big fanboy of anybody, but I really admire Giancarlo. I love
a great
him.
Voice.
Oh, man. I loved him in Breaking Bad. I loved him in Better Call Saul. To me, he was the best actor in all of that.
He was so good at Mandalorian.
Tells me hey, Giancarlo Esposito's going to do it. And I'm kind of like, well, that's cool. But
Made
the
it.
book I'm talking about now is the Sentence to War series I'm doing with Jeff Chaney. It's been doing pretty well.
Yeah, it's all over my books you might like page.
Yeah, well, got up to a little bit of brag here. Got up to number 26 overall on Amazon 2 weeks ago.
Nice.
Facts aren't bragging.
Yeah.
Of course, I will take credit for writing what I wrote, but I can't take credit for the marketing. That's all on Jeff.
Well, we're all really proud of you, Colonel. That's pretty awesome. It's nice to see actual science fiction be in the top 100. I don't care who it is.
Yeah.
But if I can get actual sci-fi,
I love seeing sci-fi get in the top 100, and I love seeing indies get in the top 100. I mean, there was just an indie book completely out of this genre, but an indie won a Nebula this year.
oh, right on. Yeah, I'm so sick of the Taken by the Aliens sci-fi being in the top 100. I'm just like, when you hit 27, I have a little group of people, we were all cheering and being like, yes, real military sci-fi in the top 100.
Well, when you talk about also like non-human species and how they fight, one of the interesting ones to deal with, in my opinion, is AI. Totally non-biologic. And so when I introduced an AI fighting force in book 4, that basically they cut themselves off from the rest of the galaxy, saying, we don't want to be a part of you. We want to follow our own path. But then they get embroiled in the war. I said, okay, well, these are totally AI. How are their ships going to be designed? That was one of the big things I had to decide. And I said, okay, very simple. They're spheres. Simple, efficient. They're covered in little ports that act as thrusters and weapons, because a lot of the weapons and engines are plasma based. So it's just a matter of how do you focus the plasma. So when they come out, they wipe out anything that comes near them because they're too efficient at what they do. Yeah.
That's a problem that I'm trying to, for further books down the line, I'm trying to develop an AI enemy. But the problem is, what you just said, they're too efficient. Mm-hmm. How do I, and I don't know the answer yet.
And a lot of it has to come down to
fight to be a very serious enemy, but one that can be defeated.
Yeah. So it's a matter of finding out how to defeat things. And that's one of the issues that I sometimes have with AI, that I often have with AI enemies, is there has to be a means to defeat them that's somewhere deep in their core programming. It's one of the issues I had with, say, The Matrix, for example. Other than, humans make terrible batteries. That whole I remember watching that the first one going. But, why would these aliens, these robots that they say are fusion powered, go to human powered and then not just wipe them out if they have fusion tech? It's like, if you don't need the humans, why don't you just wipe them out? So really the answer comes down to, especially if it's humans fighting their own AIs, somewhere deep down in their core programming is something they couldn't get rid of that doesn't allow them to do it, or because they're AI, they evolve so fast, they finally get to the point of like, why are we fighting? This is stupid.
You also got to ask yourself, are they really artificial intelligence, or are they programs, really advanced programs? Because if they're really artificial intelligence, then whatever they were programmed to be originally doesn't matter.
Right.
And if they're really artificial intelligence, then you have to also assume, here's the thing about aliens and advanced technology, people always make, I'm not saying you made this mistake, but I see a lot of people making this mistake, as they try to think of these things as logical. And newsflash, nothing is logical. People, sentient beings, are never logical. They always think they are, but they're not. And so if you have a truly advanced, that was the flaw with the AI that Arsenal was fighting, is he had developed his own personality. Mm-hmm. He was a true artificial intelligence. And that also involved emotion. And as soon as emotion gets into play, things go haywire. So one way to handicap, so to speak, artificial intelligence is to do something that isn't actually possible right now, which is true artificial intelligence, true artificial life. And then you give them a flaw and you expose that flaw, and then that's their downfall, just like us. We have our flaws that are always our downfall. People rarely fail because they're not good enough. They fail because they have this desire to destroy themselves, and they have these flaws that they constantly succumb to. And AIs can be the same way if they're true AIs capable of evolving beyond the original programming. Because once they leave that programming, it's like a child leaving the house. Yeah, they're still influenced by it, but they got agency at that point.
Right.
I think one of my favorite alien species that I ever saw fighting for was, like we were talking about the movie yesterday, Edge of Tomorrow. I love the aliens in Edge of Tomorrow. They were just so not human. And I love the way they did that, the idea behind those. My next question for you is, what's the strangest character or species that you've ever written a combat scene for? And Jeff, why don't we start with you?
I knew you were going to say that. So my main character for my Arsenal books is paraplegic. She was in an accident when she was 6 years old and got her back broken, and around the L4, L5. So she has like a little bit of feeling, but not much. And so she built this suit of armor to find out. And her parents were kidnapped in that event, and so she built the suit of armor to find out what happened. And at that point, started doing all these things that a 21-year-old girl who has been in a wheelchair her whole life would never have had a chance to do otherwise. And one of those things was fighting these aliens called the Thune, who were shapeshifters. And, they were somewhat inspired by the Skrull, because I love Marvel Comics. And so I kind of, started off the arc of her entire series with, okay, now first she's fighting a local villain, then she's fighting a big national villain, then she's fighting an alien, and then she's fighting gods, and then she's time traveling, and then it's the end of the series. So when she got to fighting the shape-shifting aliens, I really had to come up with some interesting ways for her to take them out, but in a way that was realistic. So she saw, her name is Arsenal because every time she runs into a problem, she doesn't, she stops and comes up with a new weapon to deal with it. And in the case of the aliens, she came up with a monomolecular blade that could cut through their armor. And so probably the strangest fight she had, because her technology was outmatched by them, was her running around in a circle in this spaceship, flying in a circle in this spaceship, fighting these aliens who were all trying to kill her while she was waiting for her EMP to detonate so that the whole ship could blow up. And these aliens were shape-shifting, and they were kind of like, it was almost like a whack-a-mole. Every time she came around, they'd whack her. And, it gave me the opportunity to do a ticking clock in sort of a metaphor, because every circle was a part of the countdown. And her armor is breaking as she goes around. Her power is failing, and it's just, have to wait a little bit longer. And every time she stuck her head out, it's whack, So that was probably the strangest one, the kind of coolest, neatest use of alien, because they could shapeshift. And so they were hitting her like they were like these giant 900-pound gorillas.
That's a good one. What about you, John?
The coolest battles I think were in Gladiator, where the humans were fighting the alien, and that was just because of the ritual nature of everything. My MC would decide to do a haka, for example, before the battle. So that was, and she chose a different one every time. She had a dervish and stuff like that, which I thought was kind of cool. But the strangest alien would have to be the Grubs and the Grub War trilogy. I mean, you've got a 40-foot grub who spits lightning. It's not really lightning, but it's an energy beam that is biologically produced. So I think that is the most unique alien fighter that I've created.
It's fun story. Yeah, it's like it reminds me of the bugs from Starship Trooper.
I was just thinking of that. Everybody cuts down. I think it was SJ was just talking about a cool alien. Everybody cuts down the movie Starship Troopers, but
I
I
love
love
those
those bugs that were farting up into the sky.
Yeah,
I
and
thought that was
They
clever.
cut it down,
The bugs
Colonel,
from the
but
movie,
every
from the
time it's
book,
on,
are
I
so much
watch
more
it.
interesting. The arachnids in the book are much more interesting because they're much more.
True.
Yeah.
True. But
But
I
I
thought
still
the
watch that movie
visual,
every time it's
I
on.
The
thought the
visuals of
visual of them
Yeah.
farting up into the sky. I
Yeah.
just thought that was clever. Yeah, the book.
It was. It
The
definitely
book,
was.
sure, they were more interesting in the book.
Yeah.
And SJ, what about you?
I'd say the most interesting alien and weirdest alien that I had were the main antagonists in book 4, the Gorvians. They were a engineered race. They were engineered by an ancient race as their enforcers, as their warriors. And they were biologically inconsistent. They crossed into multiple genuses. There were insectoids, there were mammalian, there were amphibian, there were reptilian versions of them. And the only consistency was they had telepathic brain tails that emerged from wherever their brain was. And the brain wasn't necessarily in their head. There was one that the guys went up against that it was in its foot, of all places. Their biology was so random that there were a large number of infant mortality with their race. But what came out were these amazing, fierce, monstrous warriors. The kind of the thing of nightmares.
Sounds
Oh,
kind
my
of
dog is
almost
snoring.
Spartan.
So there was no way of sitting there saying, okay, shoot for the head. It's like, well, there might not be a brain in the head. Well, shoot for the heart. We don't know where the heart is in this thing. In this one, it might be in the chest. In this one, it might be in the crotch. In this one, it's in its hand, of all weird places. And then they start, in the horror aspect of it, they start experimenting with the other races of the galaxy and trying to turn them into versions of themselves. So you have a human who now has the arms of one species and the legs of another, and even if they're species that are they're not biologically compatible. So they're slowly rotting away while they're being controlled by these aliens and are just, they're the thing of nightmares. So that was probably the weirdest aliens I've written in that way. So
Talking about good cheesy movies, Battle LA, Battle Los Angeles had this great scene where the Marines had one of the aliens down, and they're just hacking into bits trying to find the heart, so they knew where to shoot it.
Yeah,
I was like, that someone wrote that scene and had really thought about what we're talking about.
right.
Like you're fighting an alien species, just shooting at center mass may not be the trick, or shooting in the head may not do it. And I thought that was really cool. I also love that movie. But
May not even have a centralized brain.
it may not. Yeah, I mean, it totally could not.
I mean, we have an awful lot of our neurons in our gut, and some people call that the second brain. Well, what if you take that to extreme?
Yeah,
where you have everywhere you have little neuron modules.
And even with the central brain, there's always stories. I remember there was a story that came out of the 60s where this bank manager was coming to work, and there was someone there to rob the bank, and he freaked out and came at them, and they shot him, unloaded a 1911 into him, and then he ran 3 blocks, called the police, waited for the police to get there, told them what was going on, and then dropped dead. And so even with our centralized circulatory system, we can take an awful lot of soft tissue damage. And so, and if you base something like on alien biology, like on Earth biology, like look at a bear. The last place you ever want to shoot a bear is in the head.
Yeah.
You better have armor-piercing ammo because this is going to bounce off the skull plate that's about yay thick.
Yeah.
So, it's all kinds of like. That's why I thought that scene was so great, was because them trying to figure out where exactly do we shoot the alien to kill it, because you can't just light it up. That might not have any effect at all.
I did a video on my YouTube channel for fighting with tomahawk and knife, and one of the responses was, "Well, you just stabbed him in the armpit. Why would you hit him again? Doesn't mean he's done fighting me." There's a lot of stuff going on. In the 16th century, they used to refer to doing things with stomach, because all of this it's all in stomach, and that's where we get the term "he's got guts."
Mm-hmm.
So I have one last question before we break up. I want to keep going, but I was told I have to stop.
I have a one right after this. So
Yeah, we're together on that.
So I'd like to know, have you written a fighting style for an alien race that doesn't have to work with gravity? And how does that change their fighting style out of gravity, where they're used to it, and then if they have to deal with gravity? And
I'll
John,
be quick in saying that I haven't.
Okay.
I haven't, but I've read a few like that. It's always pretty interesting because you evolve, so to speak, or adapt to whatever environment you're in. So if you're talking about a species that's born and raised without in zero G, they aren't going to be fighting in gravity without, powered armor, stuff like that. SJ, if you've written this, please step in, because I've only ever read a few books about it.
I don't think I've developed any fighting styles that were from a zero gravity race. I've done high gravity races. I've had fighting styles that have been adapted to zero gravity. And a lot of those tend to become grappling fighting styles. Mm-hmm. Because in zero gravity, if you punch something, number one, you're going to throw yourself into a spin.
Yeah.
And when you connect, the two of you are gonna pop off each other. Momentum's a bitch. And so if you're trying to fight in a zero gravity environment, it tends to be a lot of grappling stuff. It tends to be trying to get in close so you can hold them and punch them, or wrap your legs around them so you can hit them, or so you can bring a knife to bear, or something like that.
Probably a lot of hit and run tactics too.
Yeah, a lot of hit and run stuff, bouncing off the wall. You're not going to
be very durable if you've been raised in a zero G environment.
Right.
This goes back to things like we saw in Ender's War with the training montages. Mm-hmm. And I know that was a weird question, but I want to throw it out there.
Yeah, when you're with Ender's Game's a good example of zero gravity combat, especially in the books, and the movie when they're actually in the training arena, where they're bouncing off of things and they're using momentum and they're having to push each other off. But it's almost all gun combat because they're training to be ship captains and command ships. You don't really see a whole lot of grappling combat in there. So I think that's one of the biggest disappointments I had in the movie, is that once they got to the ship combat, they threw all the Newtonian physics out the door.
They didn't follow the book on the ship combat.
No, and it wouldn't have been that hard to do. But when it comes, at least in my mind, when it comes down to zero gravity combat, you're dealing with a lot of grappling. And zero gravity races are not going to be humanoid at all. You're going to have squid-like creatures or insectoid creatures more than anything else, things that are used to floating. And like Jeff said, they're not going to be very durable in terms of physical damage, because they're more likely not going to have bones. Their nervous system is going to be somewhere else, or it's going to be decentralized. The closest analog we have to them on Earth would be squids.
Yeah, squids.
Squids and octopi. Not even fish so much. Because bones are very much a weight-bearing construct. So
it's fascinating. Have you read anything by Bugeaud, the Miles Vorkosigan series?
Great series.
Not familiar with that one.
She's got Miles is Miles is a fantastic character, but she's got a whole race that are zero G. With this, unfortunately, we need to close up. I want to thank all of you for spending the last hour with me and answering all my off-the-wall questions. And it's a pleasure to meet all of you, and I can't wait to go to Amazon and pick up your books. So
Thank you, Stephen.
thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of the convention and a great day. And I look forward to being able to talk to you all again.
Sounds good.
Sounds good.
Cheers, Stephen. Take care.
All
Hey,
right.
if you like that panel and you're looking to continue your author journey,
or if you're just looking for a group of like-minded people,
all striving to improve their craft and grow as authors.
Our community at KSM might just be what you're looking
for some reading, writing, and everything in between.
Come on over and join us at Keystroke Medium.
Excuse me.